We're honoured to welcome Professor David Hickton to the stage. He's the founding director of the University of Pittsburgh Institute of Cyber Law, Policy and Security. He served as U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania from 2010 to 2016, where he tackled major challenges including cyber threats and the opioid crisis. He holds faculty positions at both the University of Pittsburgh and right here in Trinity College Dublin. I've had the privilege to speak to him a little bit this morning. He's a brilliantly articulate storyteller and a fascinating individual. So give him a huge round of applause and welcome to the stage.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. And thank you, Trinity, for our partnership and sponsorship. Thank you, Ergo. And I think the only thing I can do is screw up this really great conference at this point. My responsibility today is to talk to you a little bit about security, and I think I want to say a couple preliminaries. If we had met 10 or 15 years ago, I was busy about having received this great appointment from President Obama to start a campaign to apply law to digital space. It was literally a Wild West. There were no rules. We were dealing with a progressive threat that really began with a threat against children through predators. It migrated to senior citizens and regular Americans losing their personal identifiable information and losing their money. That led to transnational gangs across the world, ultimately nation-state actors. And I made my name by making Pittsburgh what the FBI director called the tip of the spear for all cyber law enforcement. We brought 50 really large cases, started with a case involving the Chinese PLA hacking into iconic American companies that migrated to some Russian hackers, some of the most famous and important hackers in Russia. So in Pittsburgh, we had the ball for China and Russia, and to give you a sense of context, New York had the ball for Iran, and LA had the ball for North Korea, which were our four principal adversaries. But the point is that if you caught me on an elevator and said, "Why are you doing this?" I was trying to apply law to digital space. As a lawyer, that would be my bias, but really to build a safe and secure world, I believe that law must be the foundation of how we operate over the internet. So I was first introduced to AI in a conversation between Leo Gerard, who was the president of the United Steelworkers of America, the largest industrial union in North America, and Klaus Kleinfeld, who was the CEO of Alcoa. Both of them were victims in my case against the PLA. They had both been hacked. Alcoa had a joint venture which had been hacked, and the steelworkers had been hacked in a World Trade Organization case where their briefs and the private communications with their experts had been invaded. And they had introduced me to the new topic of a book that had been written at that time called The Second Machine Age. And it was really more about additive manufacturing. We were talking about more precise tolerances, less time, less waste, certainly less human resource problems, but it did involve the introduction into the workplace of additive manufacturing and AI. And the question presented in my early discussions about AI was, how was this going to affect the workforce? Where were people going to work? We were in the middle of something that you now see very mature in the United States, of a collapse of our industrial base since 2000. And everybody was worried, and the political consequences should be clear to all of you here in Europe, what the effect of that was, the break of the American dream and where we're going to go. And I tell you that because whenever I get the platform to talk about AI, I think it's important at the beginning and the end of every discussion to say, AI is magical. The promise of AI is staggering. The good that AI can do is overwhelming, but we have to be careful because not everybody is operating in good faith. And we have to be especially careful because whether people are foolish or they're complicit in fraud, the people that we interact with every day go back and forth about their day-to-day lives. And, you know, it's not just Joe who's a cyber dolt and can't seem to get clear on what his password is anymore. We've now come to the realization in the evolution in the last 15 years that if somebody makes a mistake in the workplace, it risks the enterprise. And we've gone from in the United States where we used to fire this CISO to boards and leaders are gone. I want to also, before I go to the slides, talk about how I was rattled when I came here for this trip. They put me up at the Mont Hotel, which is fabulous. But when I had my own law firm, I had this really great idea that was a brilliant idea, poorly executed, that to build esprit de corps, I would roll out an alcohol cart on Friday afternoon and open up the conference room so everybody could get to know each other outside the workplace. And the reason it was a good idea with poor execution, it was a human resource disaster of the first order. I'll save you all the details other than to say that if it were a Netflix series, it would be at least 6 episodes. I came to call our conference room the sin bin. So you might imagine that I was a little rattled when I showed up to check in at the Mont, and the bar was called the sin bin. And I thought, somebody has been monitoring not only my life, or writing the letter back to my 40-year-old self, but that's how much AI is in my mind. There's so many things we could talk about when you talk about security, but I've decided to focus upon 4. But before I do, you know, I think it's important to talk about what do we mean by AI security. I've said for years, like, you know, almost in a rant, cybersecurity means different things to different people. There's many different definitions of cybersecurity, and AI is different things to different people, so we're all free to have our own opinion about what it means, but I think it's important to start with a baseline of what I'm talking about today. And I think that AI security means securing our AI systems and then utilizing AI to improve our cybersecurity. So the first one I'd like to talk about, with the first story I told you, you're going to think alcohol is present in all my conversations, but as a takeoff on bring your own bottle to a party, bring your own AI to the workplace. I mean, I think this is terrifying. This expansion of the risk of someone coming to the workplace with their own AI, and it's not just because they want to take their Myers-Briggs test or do the Wonderlic test because you're considering them for a higher appointment within the organization for personal use. If they have an assignment they're behind on, if they're working on something that may involve the use of your data, and what I really think you always have to be concerned about when you're talking about cybersecurity or AI risk within cybersecurity is if you sit somewhere in the supply chain. My wife is a fairly prominent aerospace and metals expert in the United States and has had a series of very important responsibilities. And I've worked in the aerospace industry, but just as an illustration, we have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers in aerospace. And you can imagine that Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Airbus sit in tier 1, the main A-frame people, and tier 2 might be the structural components, and tier 3 would be further down the chain, and so forth. But the whole process of the industrial threat has migrated to an appreciation that the adversaries go to the weakest link. And while Boeing and Airbus and Northrop Grumman may have robust cybersecurity measures, the smaller companies simply do not. And therefore they have less capacity, less ability to deal with it, and they're more at risk from the adversaries. And when you put AI on top of that, and the statistics show how much AI is being imported into the workplace, you have a very dramatic expansion of that risk. And the only solution for it really, and I'm going to talk about mitigation at the end, but it's going to be stacked throughout the mitigation discussion, is to train your employees. Bring transparency to your workplace. They're all using AI, and it's putting your head in the sand like an ostrich to decide that you don't have a risk in this area. The second one is the expansion, exponential, I would say, of conventional threats. And I think that, as I say, that allows for scalability. I think all of this is true. Look, as a general matter, since I was in the sun 10 years ago, the volume of documents that are on the digital, we have an avalanche of data. It's now coming at us twice as fast. I was for a time in the Biden administration on one of the national security boards related to the classification of documents. And if you read about what was going on down at Mar-a-Lago, that was interesting. But we had a chart that showed from the Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, an illustration of how many documents were in the federal government. Well, that's true of your workplace too. And when you have people accessing those documents and you have adversaries on the outside, the once ability to hide a document you did not want to be found. When I was a young lawyer, we used to call it tank carring someone. If you had a bad document, you'd send a lot of documents and they wouldn't find it. Well, that ability right now for that document to be either hidden or found is now dramatically a different story with AI, and especially with generative AI. I think that the scalability, the ease of entry, and the ability to improve the attack vectors are directly the result of our move into AI, and I just think they have to be accounted for when you're doing your response to threats. Now, the next challenge is adversarial attacks. And even now the AI systems can be attacked. And we've used this term over the course of my career as a cyber warrior as the man in the middle. And the man in the middle, when you're talking about all the various components of our digital platform, adding AI to it, it just creates greater access for our adversaries. And the thing that I would ask you to focus on this slide is the word poisoning. I think that this is one of the most dramatic changes when we talk right now, where until it matters, you might not know that the data that you're relying upon has actually been poisoned. And through AI, these attack vectors are exquisite. They're sophisticated. And, I've heard and used the remark that Satan has been let into the house by others, and I still believe that AI net is good for us, but I think that we've really opened ourselves up. We're operating in good faith and with trust, but the people that would have us for breakfast, lunch, and dinner are not. And I think the AI platform has really just completely confounded these cyber attack vectors. And this is the one that really, I think, keeps me up at night. I think we're all dealing with the equivalent of this with bots when we think we're talking to a human being when we call a phone menu. But just ponder for a second, how do you roll back? What is your liability if, in the interest of efficiency, And by the way, that's always the case. I mean, this stuff will be cheaper. You will save money. And the privacy security axis was something I operated in when I was U.S. Attorney. And now as a policy person, it's kind of the security operability axis, if you will. One of the things that happened over the arc of my career is during the cybersecurity world, everybody was concerned that we needed to use the digital platform efficiently. So we were focused on interoperability, and we attached most of the critical infrastructure in the United States to our SCADA systems, and that meant that if one hack came in, we were trapped because everything was vulnerable then. So we then went to segregation, so that if we kept the records secure in human resources and that was hacked, the budget process wasn't, or the innovation group wasn't. Now with AI, we seem to be trending more towards operability bias, and once you go towards operability bias, you have just juiced the security risk. And I don't think this can be understated. This is a huge problem, and imagine trying to manage it yourself if you were in the risk management side of the house, and imagine trying to manage it if you have a cast for economic reasons of so-called virtual employees. I don't know how you bring accountability to it. So here's the list of mitigations. I mean, training. Now they say, and they said for a long time, the most perfectly trained workforce in America, which cybersecurity training is very complicated, but it really comes down to three things: strong, changed passwords, dual factor authentication, and never click on a link, or attachment security. If you do those three things, you can generally reduce the risk way down. But they say that if you put together a perfect training program, and you train very well and frequently, 1 in 7 people will click on a malicious link. The case I did that involved the PLA from China, U.S. Steel Corporation was one of the victims, and the email that opened up U.S. Steel was a spoofed email from the chairman, John Surma, very short: all employees attached, please find latest steel industry trends. And if you have a workforce in the tens of thousands, what are the odds that someone's not going to click on that? Almost nil. So training is something you have to do, but we all have to be realistic about where we're going with training. I would commend to all of you on the second point a review of at least the executive summary of the Solarium Commission done in the United States in 2018. This was a bipartisan group, senators and congressmen. The executive director, Mark Montgomery, is a personal friend of mine and a very credentialed former nuclear sub-admiral who was John McCain's chief of staff. And it put together 67 recommendations that were largely put into law during the Biden administration. And one of them was to try and create a secure digital ecosystem by having the equivalent of Underwriters Laboratory put certifications on what we do. Now, I have nothing but apologies for what's going on in America for all of you, in case you want to talk to me about it after we're done. But I will say this was an oasis of hope, because it was a bipartisan effort. There was largely consensus on it. And despite all the nonsense you hear from across the pond, there's large consensus on some of these things. What there isn't consensus on that we should be very concerned about, and was reflected in that appalling and embarrassing speech by J.D. Vance in Munich, which is a threat challenge to Europe that you better not regulate this space. And I'm one American, I've published a lot on this, who believes that regulation is not only needed, but it will actually foster innovation, and that I'm grateful for Europe's leadership on GDPR and your AI Act, but you will not find many people like me right now. Number 3 would be, I think you have to be proactive, not reactive. I don't think you can sit passively with regard to the introduction of AI into your workplace and assume that you can wait until the problem develops. Even while I've been here the last couple of weeks, I've been getting calls from business people in America saying, I have a problem, we're shut down, the problem you never want to have is ransomware. And, for a small company, being shut down for a week, where you can't get your receivables and you can't get your bills out, is $1 million problem. And the dirty little secret about ransomware is that we still don't have a very good answer for it. If you're not backed up and not prepared to tank your system, you're probably going to spend more now today unscrambling the eggs than you might want to do paying the ransom. And I would never recommend you pay a ransom, because that's rewarding negative behavior and they'll be back at you the next time. And I did the very first ransomware case in the world in 2013 against a Russian hacker named Evgeny Bogachev at a time when the ransoms were $750 in Bitcoin. And we're a long way from that. It's real money now. And when you put AI on top of it, if the outcome is through an AI-enhanced attack that you are a ransomware victim, you are in trouble. So I think you have to be proactive. I do not think you can simply wait for this to happen. I think you need to take advantage of the magic of AI to incorporate it into your cybersecurity program. Specifically, it's magical in anticipating threat detection, but another way it can be magical is watching for anomalies into your system, incoming and outgoing. For example, if you start receiving overseas inflow, particularly from Shanghai or St. Petersburg, and you don't have any business relationship in Shanghai or St. Petersburg, the bell should go off. The other way, though, is one of the most frequent ways people get into our systems is through employees. I had a tragic case in Pittsburgh of an individual who worked for PPG Industries, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, which is a paint, glass, and chemical company. And it has really the franchise for air screen windshields in jets, both military and commercial. And this individual had a human resource problem, and he was let go, and in retaliation he decided that he was going to sell all that proprietary information to an on-the-ground spy, and we caught him. His family joined with us and begged that the judge detain him before the trial, and the judge said no, and he hung himself after the initial appearance. And we lost him, and we also lost a budding investigation. But that was not only a case, it was a tragedy, but it was an illustration of a real risk. The adversary looks for the people who have the human resource problem, and AI gives them a better ability to do it. And it doesn't have to be someone who has a grievance, it could be an innocent dupe. And I will tell you that I don't make friends by telling people this when I do this at home. But the weakest link in any organization is the executive staff to the leadership, because they think the rules don't apply to them. And they're working so hard that they need reaffirmation every day that they matter. And one of the ways they get that affirmation is to be able to say, I can pass passwords around by text. I can tell people in an email what John Kelleher, it doesn't happen here. It would never happen here. I apologize for that example. But I just had it with a bank back home. And I mean, the leak which wasn't a leak, it was a 36-inch water main gusher, was coming right through the executive staff. And that's because people just feel like they want to say that the rules don't apply. The final point is kind of why I'm here. Look, I sought to be at Trinity, but it's really through Trinity's good graces that I'm here, and ADAPT, and John, and Declan, and Olivia. I wanted to build a transatlantic partnership with my think tank I have at the University of Pittsburgh right now, because cyber knows no national boundaries, and cyber does not respect our oceans. And I thought that what you were doing here in Europe, and particularly with Ireland and Trinity being my platform, with the tech presence here, and the way that Trinity punches way above its weight and Ireland punches way above its weight, was just a perfect partnership for what I do. You know, I fancy when I get up in the morning that I'm working on projects that other people haven't thought about the answers to, or even better yet, thought about the questions. I was in cyber before anyone else. I was in opioids before anyone else. We did a really good election security report. We did a report on how municipal governments use decision-making algorithms. There was a mention of it before about bias, and both of those last two reports can be found at cyber.pitt.edu. But the child welfare people in Pittsburgh came to me, and I'd worked with them when I was U.S. Attorney, and they said, we're concerned that when we get a distress call, we're using AI to sort the priorities. And nobody knows what we're doing, and there are no national standards on how you can use this. It also developed when we started to look that the Pittsburgh police were using facial recognition technology for predictive policing, which, as you may know, facial recognition technology is very good finding someone like me because there's a lot of data, but it is terribly inaccurate with regard to women and people of color. And so we went in and we found out that in Pittsburgh, everybody was happy when you could get out of a Steeler game parking lot faster because AI was being employed. And they were happy when we had snow, when the finite number of snow removal resources were deployed in concert with the National Weather Service. But it was totally wrong, and it was pouring technology on top of historical racism to use AI to decide that if you had 10 calls, the only calls that you should surge the police to were in the minority communities. Or you're using AI to predict whether a criminal would be a recidivist, and therefore, and it is true in our country, that black people are 4 times more likely to get a longer sentence and twice as likely to be charged for the exact same crime. So the problem horizon is rich, and it's common to all of us. But I will leave you with this in conclusion. We are at a dangerous point in the world's history. And again, I offer you my apologies. We are responsible for some of it. But the digital platform has created a whole new age and world for us. And if you look across the arc of history, I think you will find that when mankind or humankind has faced great challenges, people retreated to the university community for the answers. And the university communities partnered with people outside the community of people of goodwill who wanted to do the common good. We are at that moment right now. The reason I work so hard now, and the reason I'm so filled with gratitude for Trinity and this opportunity that I have here right now, is we absolutely can make a difference together. Thank you.
Micro risk assessments was a little bit off the topic there, and I heard an interesting conversation the other day. It was with Paul Tudor-Jones. And Paul Tudor-Jones isn't an AI guy, but he happened to attend an AI conference with 15 of the real movers and shakers in AI, Sam Altman, the various heads of the agentic AI movement. And I heard him being interviewed, and he spoke about, Paul Tudor-Jones, for context, is he's not an AI guy, but if you look at the last couple of decades, he probably is the foremost authority in macro risk assessment. And he assessed the risk of AI. And I know we haven't got time for too many questions, but I'd love to put this to Professor Hickton. He assessed the risk of AI killing at least 50% of the world's population at 10%. Seem accurate?
That's a tough one. I did a program last year, which is material to your question. I keynoted and hosted a program here in Dublin called AI in the Next Pandemic. If you've reviewed my background, I took a leave of absence and I was in charge of the coronavirus oversight for the US Congress in 2020 and 2021, overlooking all that $7 trillion we threw at the pandemic. And so all that stuff with Dr. Fauci and PPP, that was us. I brought a Yale researcher together with a Cambridge researcher and a couple others, and Rand was involved, and we tried to look at the question, how could I have done my job better overseeing COVID if I had AI? Because in the United States, we don't have a National Health Service, so I was there to test, track, and trace, and we had no data. And so it was really complicated. But the point is, to your question, is that entire conversation then migrated to how could a malign actor take AI and kill the world's population? Because the process of getting rapid vaccines, which really started with George Bush and was incentivized by Barack Obama of investing in a new way other than eggs to get vaccines, and then was claimed by the person who we shall not name, who was the president at that time. But we did get a rapid vaccine, but we did it through RNA. And what came out of this conference was, if someone took AI and applied it to available RNA strands online, you could create an unstoppable pandemic for which there would be no response. And the example was used with smallpox. And now you may have noticed that we have, in addition to bad manners breaking out in my country, we have a wave of people who believe in anti-vaccine. And we have a measles epidemic going on right now. And you could either start an epidemic or a pandemic, or you could put AI on top of one. So I don't know what the percentages of this are, but again, I think a point that bears repeating is not everybody is using these tools for good.